I don't always read that. People are very willing to tell me that, but I don't think I am. I'm affectionate with myself.
27 years.
There are moments in history that don't need embellishment to hold an audience. The death of Diana, Princess of Wales, is one of them. No invented tomb needs to be opened. No secret commission needs to be conjured out of thin air. The real story, the one built entirely out of court records, sworn testimony, and 2 decades of formal investigation, is already strange enough, sad enough, and unresolved enough to keep people awake at night wondering what they still don't know. This is that story, not the one built on fabricated letters and imaginary panels, but the one that actually happened, told the way it actually unfolded. At just after midnight on the 31st of August, 1997, a black Mercedes-Benz S280 entered the Pont de l'Alma underpass in Paris, traveling at high speed. Behind the wheel was Henri Paul, acting head of security at the Hotel Ritz Paris. In the car were Diana, Princess of Wales, her partner, Dodi Fayed, and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones, the only occupant who survived. The car struck the 13th pillar of the tunnel. Dodi Fayed and Henri Paul were killed instantly. Diana, critically injured, was taken to Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital, where she died in the early hours of the morning despite emergency surgery. She was 36 years old. The car had left the Ritz only minutes earlier, pursued by photographers on motorcycles trying to capture images of the couple. That pursuit, and the question of how much it contributed to the crash, became one of the defining threads of everything that followed. French judicial authorities opened a criminal investigation within hours. Judge Hervé Stephan led an inquiry that ran for roughly 2 years, drawing on toxicology, vehicle forensics, and dozens of witness statements from the paparazzi, hotel staff, and bystanders. The toxicology results showed that Henri Paul had a blood alcohol level of roughly 3 times the French legal limit for driving, along with traces of prescription medication in his system. Investigators also determined the Mercedes had been traveling at a speed far beyond what the tunnel could safely accommodate. Estimates put it well above 60 miles per hour in a zone designed for far slower traffic. French investigators did examine reports that a white Fiat Uno may have been in the tunnel and made contact with the Mercedes before the crash. Paint transfer evidence recovered from the wreckage was consistent with a white vehicle, and the French police pursued the lead for years. A Fiat Uno registered to a paparazzo named James Ananson was investigated and ultimately ruled out based on available evidence, though the car itself was never conclusively tied to the crash with certainty that satisfied everyone. The vehicle, and its driver, if one existed and fled, has never been definitively identified. That loose thread has never fully closed, and it remains one of the few genuinely unresolved technical questions in the case. In September 1999, French prosecutors closed the case with no charges filed, concluding that Henri Paul's driving, impaired by alcohol and excessive speed, was the primary cause of the crash. The French conclusion did not end the matter in Britain. Diana's former partner's father, Mohammed Al Fayed, publicly and repeatedly alleged that the crash was not an accident, but the result of a conspiracy involving the British security services, allegedly ordered at the highest levels of the royal establishment. Those allegations, made across interviews, lawsuits, and public statements for years, kept pressure on British authorities to formally revisit the case rather than simply defer to the French findings. In January 2004, the Metropolitan Police Service launched Operation Paget, led by then-Commissioner Lord Stevens. It was, by any measure, an enormous undertaking. Investigators reviewed thousands of documents, re-interviewed witnesses, consulted forensic specialists, and directly examined the conspiracy allegations that had circulated for years, including claims involving the security services, altered photographs, and the white Fiat Uno. The Paget report was published in December 2006, running past 800 pages. Its central conclusion was blunt. Diana, Dodi Fayed, and Henri Paul died as the result of the grossly negligent driving of Henri Paul, who was intoxicated and driving at excessive speed, compounded by the fact that neither Diana nor Dodi were wearing seatbelts. The report explicitly examined and rejected the theory that the crash was orchestrated by British intelligence, finding no credible evidence to support it. Al-Fayed rejected the findings outright and continued to press his claims publicly for several more years before eventually, in 2008, stating he would no longer pursue the conspiracy theory, though he maintained he still had personal doubts. Operation Paget fed directly into a formal inquest, which opened in October 2007 under Coroner Lord Justice Scott Baker and ran for 6 months, one of the longest inquests in British legal history. It heard from more than 250 witnesses, including surviving bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones, royal household staff, paparazzi present that night, and forensic experts. In April 2008, the jury returned a verdict of unlawful killing, finding that Diana and Dodi Fayed were unlawfully killed due to the grossly negligent driving of the following vehicles, meaning both Henri Paul's driving and the paparazzi vehicles pursuing the Mercedes, and due to the fact that the Mercedes occupants were not wearing seatbelts. The jury was permitted to consider a verdict of unlawful killing by conspiracy, but no juror returned that verdict. On the specific formal evidentiary record, the jury did not find evidence of an assassination or a state-orchestrated plot. That is the closest thing that exists to an official, contested in open court, cross-examined legal conclusion about how Diana died. It was not secret. It was not quiet. It was public, adversarial. And it lasted 6 months specifically because so many alternative theories were allowed to be raised and tested. None of this, the French inquiry, Operation Paget, the inquest, fully closed the emotional or cultural chapter on Diana's death, and it's worth being honest about why. Part of it is simply the scale of the loss. Diana was, by any measure, one of the most photographed and most emotionally significant public figures of the 20th century. Her death came at the height of her global profile, only a year after her divorce from Prince Charles, at a moment when she had become something close to a global humanitarian icon through her landmine campaign and her AIDS activism. A death that abrupt, following a life that visible, was always going to resist tidy closure. Part of it is the involvement of paparazzi, which struck a nerve in a culture already anxious about tabloid excess. The image of a global icon being chased through a tunnel by photographers on motorcycles in the final minutes of her life crystallized a broader unease about celebrity culture that has never entirely gone away. And part of it unavoidably is the royal family itself. The Windsors are, by institutional design, an opaque family. They do not typically explain themselves in detail, and Diana's own public breakup with that culture, her BBC interview, her open unhappiness within the institution, primed the public to view royal silence with suspicion. When an institution built around discretion loses a member as beloved and as combative as Diana had become, silence reads very differently than it would from almost anyone else. Mohammed Al-Fayed's persistent and well-funded public campaign also mattered enormously. For years, he had the platform, the money, and the motivation to keep the conspiracy theory in circulation, regardless of what official investigations concluded. His claims were taken seriously enough to be formally investigated and formally addressed, twice by 2 separate national investigative bodies, which is itself unusual. Most conspiracy theories about public figures never receive that level of dedicated, funded, cross-border scrutiny. That Diana's did, and that the theories were still not substantiated, is part of the story too. It's worth being precise, because precision is exactly what gets lost in viral retellings of this story. Diana died from injuries sustained in a car crash in the Ponte El Alma tunnel on August 31, 1997. Her driver was legally intoxicated and speeding. She and Dodi Fayed were not wearing seatbelts. Paparazzi were pursuing the vehicle. 2 formal investigations, 1 French, 1 British, and a 6-month public inquest all examined and rejected the theory of an orchestrated assassination, while still formally attributing partial blame to the pursuing photographers. A white Fiat Uno's exact role and driver were never fully resolved, which remains a legitimate loose end. Public affection for Diana and public distrust of institutional secrecy generally has never fully faded. There is number 2025 or 2026 Joint Parliamentary French Commission reopening the case. There is no exhumation of Diana's grave. There is no resurfaced 1993 letter predicting her death in specific, forensic detail. There is no authenticated,
1996 recording of her describing intelligence surveillance in a way that alarmed government lawyers. These are not obscure facts being suppressed. They are simply not real events, and no credible news organization has reported them because they haven't happened. The truth about Diana's death is not a tidy one, and it was never going to be. Real institutional failures did occur that night. Inadequate speed limits enforced, a driver who should never have been behind the wheel, a security culture that allowed a visibly impaired man to drive two of the world's most photographed people through central Paris. Real questions were left formally unresolved, like the identity of the driver of that white Fiat Uno. And real public mistrust of the monarchy's opacity, some of it earned, has kept conspiracy theories alive for nearly 3 decades, filling the gaps left by an institution that has never been especially good at explaining itself to the people who loved Diana most. But the two most exhaustive, well-resourced, formally adversarial investigations ever conducted into a single traffic accident, one French, one British, run 22 years apart by people with every institutional incentive to close the case quickly, both arrived, independently, at the conclusion that this was a preventable tragedy caused by a drunk, speeding driver and a culture of relentless press pursuit, not a state-ordered killing. That conclusion doesn't make for as dramatic a headline as a reopened tomb or a prophetic hidden letter. But it has the advantage of being real and of having survived 6 months of hostile cross-examination in open court, which is more scrutiny than almost any conspiracy theory about her death has ever actually been subjected to. Diana's story endures not because the official record is secretly hiding something monstrous, but because a genuinely extraordinary woman died an ordinary, preventable kind of death, the kind caused by drunk driving and a car without seatbelts, in the middle of a life the whole world was still watching. Sometimes the hardest truth to accept isn't a cover-up. It's that tragedy, even for the most famous woman in the world, can still be this simple and this senseless.